what it
Sure.
was like working deals for CB Richard Ellis.
Life comes full circle. We're sitting here at Old Parkland, which is, Harlan Crow's iconic masterpiece in many ways. Harlan's dad, of course, is Trammell, and I worked at CBRE for many ex-Trammell Crow folks.
Yeah.
Trammell Crow was sold, spun off a good chunk of it to CBRE. This was, I think, 2006, 2007, a little bit before I joined. But my boss came from the ex-Trammell heritage, and he actually reported and worked for Trammell himself for many years. So it's all a neat, fun, small world. But I was privileged to work directly under this guy named Bill Concannon, and he's an ex-Trammell guy. He brought me in to lead corporate strategy and corporate development, which is M&A activity for specifically what we call Global Workplace Solutions, which is a very large multi-billion-dollar business unit within CBRE. And at the time, CBRE had 3 big business units. One of them is brokerage, buy, sell transactions. So if you see a sign that says CBRE out there, that's that line of business. Our line of business managed and ran facilities for large corporate clients and facilities just like the one, like large corporate campuses. And they need facilities management, they need project management, they need somebody to run their transactions, et cetera, in more of a corporate contractual manner. So, we were a growing business unit, and we were out there looking to develop strategic partnerships, which may or may not lead into M&A. But what we used M&A for was to shore up capabilities, to expand market share, to grow geographically. And so I think looking back, it's really important in M&A to figure out, first and foremost, what strategically is the underlying rationale? What are you trying to do? And some of it may be entering a new space. CBRE just recently acquired Industrious. And when I was there, I did some work around this co-working environment. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to enter a new space? Or are you trying to protect the current enterprise because you might be blindsided by a new technology or a new product? Maybe you just want to expand in a new geography where you don't have presence. So I think first, it's important to lay that out in a very clear, concise, crisp fashion. And thankfully, some of my prior experience and background at Bain was really well equipped for that strategic rationale, because that's kind of the work that we did at Bain & Company. The second, I think, is to really understand and vet the company, which is due diligence, and vet the industry, just space that they're operating in. This is where a lot of frameworks are out there, but you do strengths and weaknesses, you can do opportunities, you can pull back the profit formula for that particular type of business. And even within real estate, property management has very different underlying financials and fundamentals than brokerage or facilities management. They're all very different. So you have to really kind of break it down and understand that. And that's important, because if you enter an industry, you're subjected to whatever headwinds, tailwinds, et cetera, that industry's in. Is it a rising tide? Is there competitive cost pressure? Are there a bunch of new entrants? So understanding that and doing due diligence around the industry and around the company specifically is really important. So we did a lot of that. Working at a place like CBRE, you get a lot of inbounds, but for every inbound that you get, you probably go through dozens and dozens before you actually pursue, not even to mention close a deal. At CBRE overall, we were closing, while I was there, of various sizes, but a deal a month. So we would probably do like a dozen a year, but some of them would be small tuck-in, like, in the kind of millions range. The biggest opportunity that I was involved in while I was there and I was involved with this one heavily for the better part of probably two years, is kind of how long these things take. And of course, conversations and discussions happened way before then. But Johnson Controls is an iconic American manufacturer based in Milwaukee. Spent tons of time in Milwaukee just through this process, but Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and they are known for the thermostats that hang on the walls. But behind the thermostats are obviously HVAC units, which are chillers, coolers, and ventilation systems. So they produce the product behind that, which often sits in the attic or the basement of a building to cool or heat the building. So they're known to make products. They had a business unit that also ran the building after they installed the equipment. So that was Johnson Controls Workplace Solutions is what it was called, but it was essentially a building management division or facilities management division of Johnson Controls. But they decided, hey, we want to focus, again, their strategic rationale to exit was that we wanted to focus on making widgets, making the HVAC ductwork, and they own brands like Tran, et cetera. So they wanted to keep doing that. They wanted to exit the services business, which is the business that runs and manages the buildings. Of course, that's what CBRE does, and so we wanted to expand our presence. They brought in some strategic gaps that we wanted to fill. So going back to the strategic thing, we wanted to grow in Europe, in Asia. They had a lot of clients, a lot of on-the-ground building engineers in those spaces where we were less strong. And so we went through a whole process, and this is a big deal. So with larger deals, as you all know, there's often an auction process, as we would call it, but a bidding process where there's bankers involved. And so they're shopping and they're going out to public, private equity, all sorts of buyers out there. We were one of, we thought, more strategic and also more qualified buyers, but it was not a given. So we had to go through this whole process where multiple rounds of back and forth. And I was involved in part of that. And then I was also part of, there was a big deal that big, you actually have to go through DOJ and antitrust, et cetera. So you go through all that. And then I was part of our post-acquisition integration, and we had some revenue synergies we were trying to achieve because there's the 1 + 1 = 3 type dynamic. So there was some of that. There were some cost synergies. There were some other things. And it was a big organization that we brought in. They had 15,000+ people that we brought into CBRE. And most of these are building engineers, people working on the ground to service clients. And so we brought them in and they became CBRE employees on day one. So that was big effort. And I learned a lot through that process from the beginning to end. And I also learned a lot just observing, working for Bill. It was credit to him, his vision that the two should be combined. And he started developing relationships, partnerships, outreaching to the CEO of that business unit early on, years before any deal or any transaction took place.
So what's the difference between an acquisition like that and an acquisition like what you work on? Because like when I hear 2 years due diligence, that obviously is a very long time. But when with Lane, he quotes 6 to 18 months for his world, and obviously I'm paraphrasing heavily, but in your world, your main function is to firm up the numbers and make sure that, hey, what we say is what's happening is actually what's happening. But in a situation like that, where it's such a large corporation, is it similar? Or because I would assume like the numbers are already there.
Sure.
Like what is it that y'all are actually doing in those 2 years to kind of, make the transaction happen? Is it just verifying?
Once you enter an LOI or you start to get really deep and heavy, that is probably a, 90-day is 3 months to 6 months type thing to get to close. So all of the additional time before that equates to the 2 years is around, there's a little bit of dance before you get to the actual party. There's a lot of pre-work and selling it to our own stakeholders, developing the right relationships, assessing their leadership, and they may not even be out to market at that point. And they are still kind of vetting internally what they want to do. Maybe they just want to, partition it out into a separate little business entity over here. Maybe they want to bring in an outside investor and take some chips off the table. They're still trying to figure it out. So, we like to be at the table. It's always good to be close in at the table, be the favored, interested party early on. And some of that takes, time to develop the relationship, to go out, meet their leadership team, et cetera, before you get really into true due diligence, which often there's a time limit on that because often with two public companies, you announce the deal and then you have a certain amount of time before you close. So it is not the whole 2 years, if that makes sense. But there is, I think if you do it right, the more comfortable both parties are, and the more conversations that you've had beforehand, I think it helps culturally from a leadership and other consideration perspective, make the transaction much more smooth.